It's humbling to get to go to sites of famous historic occasions, but my favorite thing to do here on Redoubt Productions is actually go explore some hidden history, especially history hidden in plain sight. Today we're in the small community of Ligonier, Pennsylvania, and just off of Market Street, which is behind me, there is actually an old historic cemetery wedged between two towering churches. They have some very interesting burials here, so let's talk about them. So the old burial grounds we're standing right now, this was the main cemetery for Ligonier, Pennsylvania. Its origins is a little bit murky, at least to the research I was doing. The first documented graves, they're starting to pop up here around 1810, 1820, but it's expected that there were burials happening on this piece of ground going way back to the late 18th century. I've even heard a rumor that somewhere around here was where the British Army had its burial grounds for its garrison at Fort Ligonier, just a few blocks down the street. But that's local lore. There's nothing really concrete to prove that. In any case, this cemetery was attached to a Presbyterian church, and today we do have the Covenant Presbyterian Church with that towering Gothic structure overlooking us there. That was put there in 1904, 1905 roughly. So this was on some maps labeled a Presbyterian graveyard. I don't know if this was exclusive to the Presbyterians or if there were a few other denominations thrown in here. Sometimes it's called a Presbyterian graveyard. Sometimes it's said that it's just the general town burial plot. What makes it a bit interesting is around the late 19th century, the borough of Ligonier, as did many boroughs around Pennsylvania, they began to relocate their burials out of town limits for fear that mass burials would start contaminating the water supply. So by 1900, most burials for residents of Ligonier was occurring on that hillside over there, and the Valley Cemetery is still there today. Actually, the Valley Cemetery up there is home to 2 Medal of Honor recipients, which that's a video for another day. So the obelisk here, this marks the burial of 2 of the Fisher brothers, Matthias and Abel Fisher. They were part of a family of Irish immigrants who came to the Ligonier Valley shortly after the French and Indian War. And when the American Revolution is going to begin, well, if you were living in the Ligonier Valley during the American Revolution, actually you're living in anywhere west of the Allegheny Mountains, you're in a bit of trouble. You are open to attack by native war parties that were backed by the British Empire. This is part of that forgotten western feeder of the American Revolution I'm always talking about. There's constant raids between native forces, American colonists, British forces happening between western Pennsylvania, all the way out to Illinois, and all the way down the Mississippi River Valley going down to New Orleans. No major battles, some skirmishes, and a lot of brutal raids. And Ligonier is no short on stories of these terrifying raids that happen out here on the people settling. The Fisher family would actually abandon their homestead to seek refuge in York, Pennsylvania, but some of the sons of the family, such as Abel and Matthias, they're actually going to get roped into the militias. Matthias in particular, in 1781, he's going to volunteer for Colonel Archibald Lockery's expedition down the Ohio River. Lockery was recruiting volunteers, recruiting militiamen out of Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, which we're standing in right now. And his mission was to link up with George Rogers Clark, famous for capturing the British outpost of Fort Sackville. They're going to link up with Clark down the Ohio River, and they're hoping to attack native villages. The plan was if they would target native villages, this would make it very difficult for them to wage war. Unfortunately, things did not go well for Clark, and things did not go well for Matthias Fisher. According to family history, Matthias was sent down the Ohio River ahead of the main army. He was sent as a messenger by Lockery to Clark to try to tell Clark, hey, slow down, we're trying to catch up with you. Unfortunately, what ended up happening was, again, according to family history, Matthias is captured by a war party. He'll be taken into captivity with a group of natives for a little while before he's transferred over to the British garrison at Fort Detroit. As for Lockery's expedition, it did not end well. Most of them were either killed, and those that were captured, they would die later in captivity. We've actually talked about the blockhouse lockery established about 8 miles west of here. It was one of the first episodes of Retrace in History. So yeah, Lockery's expedition. Very dark day if you live in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. Matthias would survive the winter of 1781-82. And according to family history, he and about a half a dozen prisoners, they will make an escape across the St. Lawrence River. They'd eventually been shipped from Fort Detroit up past Fort Niagara up into British Canada. They get across the St. Lawrence River, trek their way through the wilderness of Vermont and down through New York, and eventually link up with Washington's encampment in Newburgh, New York by 1782. So a wild story of survival for Matthias Fisher. He would return to the Ligonier Valley and live the rest of his life. He would end up passing away in 1834 and is buried here in the old graveyard of Ligonier. Perhaps the most famous individual buried here in Ligonier's Old Town Cemetery is Louise St. Clair Robb. She was one of the daughters of General Arthur St. Clair. This was a general in the Continental Army during the American Revolution who actually lived here in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. Actually, his estate is just about 2 miles up the road from where we're standing here along 7-Eleven. Louise St. Clair, she would be one of the daughters that would provide great assistance for Arthur throughout his post-war years. Arthur became appointed governor of the Northwest Territory, basically modern-day Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. And Louise assisted in a lot of his daily assignments, daily administrative duties, assembling meetings, parties, things like that. Sounds pretty mundane, but it was very important for a governor. You know, you want to make all of your constituents very happy. So assembling all sorts of parties and all sorts of formal receptions may seem not important to us, but very important in politics, especially in 18th century politics. There's also some frontier mythology around Louise I've digged up, one of which that she was a great marksman, able to hunt down squirrels with accuracy, take that as you will. And she would end up moving back here in the region in her later life, helped her father in his final years. He passes away in 1818, and Lisa ends up marrying a War of 1812 veteran by the name of, last name was Robb. And a little bit I can find about Robb was, apparently he didn't see much fighting. He ended up getting captured by British forces near Fort Niagara during the conflict. We're jumping from the American Revolution to the American Civil War to tell you about the Byrd family. These are the father and mother, Simon Byrd and Mary Byrd, and these are some of their children. The two I want to talk about in particular is Harmon and Albert. Both of these brothers, along with two other brothers, are going to serve in the American Civil War for the Union Army. Harmon Byrd will end up being a lieutenant with the 14th Pennsylvania. Now, he's going to join right at the start of the American Civil War. The 14th is a 3-month regiment. He's joined alongside Simon, not to be confused with the father, we're talking about the Simon Jr. They're going to serve throughout the first few months of the conflict. Unfortunately, Harmon is going to get sick at the end of the 3 months enlistment, and he will actually end up dying in August of 1861. So here's a casualty of the American Civil War at the very start of the conflict, shortly after First Manassas had happened, and I think also just after Wilson Creek had happened. Doesn't die in battle, but many of the fatalities in the American Civil War are not on the battlefield. They are from illnesses in camps and later in the hospitals. In 1862, Harmon's younger brother, Albert C. Byrd, is going to enlist for 3-year service. So you're seeing a big jump from the philosophy of the American Civil War. When it starts, we're just going to be a 3-month war. A year later, this is a long conflict, 3-year enlistments. Albert is going to join the 67th Pennsylvania in Company H. There are several members of the community of Ligonier. They're going to join this company in the 67th Pennsylvania, and they're going to fight through several battles in the eastern theater of the American Civil War. And Albert is actually going to sign on for a veteran's wage in 1864. He is given 30 days leave in 1864. He's going to go to Pittsburgh, presumably to meet up with his family, and he actually goes to a photo gallery parlor and gets his portrait made. So I'm very happy to say I actually have an image of one of the folks we're talking about today. Albert will rejoin his regiment in the trenches around Petersburg, where he will fight through March 25th, 1865. Now, on March 25th, there's a lot going on around Petersburg. Robert E. Lee and the Confederate Army of North Virginia are going to launch what's considered their last great offensive. There's going to be a massive assault made on the Union lines around what's called Fort Stedman. The Confederates do briefly breach that line, but eventually Union forces plug it up. That is not the action Byrd is a part of. I thought so too, based on the date that's on his tombstone. It turns out when Lee and most of the Confederate forces attacked Fort Stedman, they left their line south of the city pretty thin. And that's going to give an opening for the Union 6th Corps to try to punch through these weak lines. They're going to test the water, see, hey, this seems like a soft underbelly. And there's going to be a skirmish on Jones's farm on March 25th. So at the same time Fort Stedman's happening, this big battle, one of the last great attacks by Robert E. Lee, there's this smaller but very important skirmish along the Southern Confederate lines. And that's what Albert Byrd was a part of. And unfortunately, in his skirmish on Jones's farm, he will be mortally wounded. He'll die 2 days later. So here we have one Byrd brother dies at the start of the war, and another will die near the end of the American Civil War. The probing on Jones's farm by the Union 6th Corps will really open up the plan for the big attack on April 2nd, 1865, which occurs in the same vicinity, and this will be the Union breakthrough of the Confederate lines around Petersburg. That's going to force Robert E. Lee to abandon his positions. He is held for over 9 months around Petersburg, Virginia, and try to evacuate west through Virginia, and ultimately about a week later he will be forced to surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. So it's sacrifices made by men like Albert Byrd that will ultimately lead to the collapse of the Confederate States of America. And I'm uncertain if this is intentional or not. You'll notice there's a cross on top of Byrd's headstone. That is the insignia. That is the insignia for the Union 6th Corps. It is a cross. So I've seen a few other graves, but not too many so far in my travels around Westmoreland County that have Corps insignias on the headstone. So I'm wondering if that is intentionally meant to represent the 6th Corps, which Albert was attached to. And if we're speaking of shared companies, this would have been a companion to Albert. This is John P. Knoll. He also served in Company H of the 67th Pennsylvania. The only information I could really find on Knoll, it appears that he was an immigrant from France. His birthplace is listed as France. And he was born in 1823, lived most of his life here in the Ligonier Valley, and lived until 1875. Here's somebody else who very likely was an acquaintance of Albert. This is George Shoup, Company H, 67 Pennsylvania, born in 1838, died in 1867. So though he will survive the American Civil War, he did not live long after. And I have a certain viewer who may or may not share lineage with this gentleman. If you know who I'm talking about, let me know in the comments or in a private message. Tell me a bit more about if you have a connection to this George Shoup. Actually, speaking of the Shoups, this is a whole plot for the Shoup family. The writing is greatly beginning to fade. I can make out that this is a John Shoup who died in 1889. We have a Peter Shoup, and you'll of course notice they do have GAR blocks here in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. We are very blessed that the GAR local chapters back in the day went out, and in addition to marking the graves, they made markers that would last. I mean, often you'll see simply a star marker like this for the GAR. This one's for Daniel H. Weimer of Company K, the 171st, and recently he has gotten a new marker, a new headstone. Very thankful for that. But most of your GAR markers, they were simply this. But at least here in Westmoreland County and also Fayette County, Pennsylvania, GAR went out of their way and put these very nice, very permanent marble blocks that it's kind of hard to see if the American flag actually have numbers. So you could go, if you get access to the GAR records, you can go take that number and you can hopefully identify who's buried there. I'm finding that's very useful for some research I've been doing. I've come across cemeteries actually like this cemetery right here, where there's no headstone, nothing except a GAR block. And thankfully with that number, we can probably find identification on who's buried at an unmarked grave and hopefully one day get them a new headstone. Well, in addition to being winter in Pennsylvania, it's also starting to rain now. So I've gone from cold to being very cold. So we're going to wrap up with this edition of Retracing History. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button down below. If you want to follow us in our future adventures, consider subscribing here to the channel. If you want to go the extra mile supporting us, keeping us on the road, you can go to our Ko-fi page and join the Garrison. It's our membership program here at Redoubt Productions, which for a small monthly fee, you will gain access to behind-the-scenes images, select scripts, and a few other bonuses I'm always trying to develop to keep the Garrison happy and proud of what we're doing here through Redoubt Productions, living, exploring, and preserving history one step at a time. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.